All right, here we are. Welcome back to Bookwave, the book club podcast. If you're new around here, you can check us out on our website at www.bookwave.club. Today we're looking at The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I'm here today with Will and Patman. My
Hey,
question my question to you guys, the audience and the both of you, are how much of this book did you find directly applicable to life outside of warfare? And other than that, what was your biggest takeaway from the book?
when I set my eyes on this book, it felt like an instruction manual. But going deeply into each chapter, Sun Tzu presents every type of warfare that can be interpreted in different ways. So his teachings offer a bit of humility, but is also very direct. He doesn't beat around the bush or anything like that. He doesn't go into like a philosophical implication. He's very direct about it, very grounded in reality. And with the humility part comes a bit of harmony because he deeply cares about setting discipline and also providing a pathway for his troops and just the average reader too, who wants to go uh, through the professional environment in like in business or science or engineering to personal life of how to get rid of your ego and provide a bit of balance in your life. And like I said, there are many interpretations to take away from this, but for the sole purposes of this episode, just getting down to the structure of what Sun Tzu is saying is probably vitally important. Which brings us to the introduction, which was very interesting. One quote that I took away from this section is a quote where he says, and this is right after he brings up a moment where he is teaching female soldiers to train, but they were failing, and therefore he led an extermination of his officers. But then he stopped after hearing about the king, who said, no, no, don't worry about it. Just continue training with them. And so they did, and they gotten a lot better. So there's a quote here that he says, he who relies solely on warlike measures shall be exterminated. He who relies solely on peaceful measures shall perish. I thought that there's no way to get away from that kind of position because no matter what you choose, no matter how you train yourself, you're going to end up in one of those two outcomes.
Well, Pat, I'm glad that you are this excited about the art of war. I really enjoyed the book too. I think that there's a lot going on, and you can get swept away pretty quick with it. And yeah, so my first thing that I want to say, wow, biggest takeaway would have been that it wasn't the art of manslaughter, which is honestly what I was kind of expecting getting into reading The Art of War. I expected there to be a lot more about bloodshed, and the big takeaway is actually the way to win wars is to make your soldiers happy and to be in the better position to have an easier time making them happy. And supreme excellence is what is it? There's a good quote. The supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Like it was honestly the opposite of what I was expecting, and I can see why this is one of those works that's kind of been immortalized for the past 3,000 years. What did you think, Scott?
Yeah, just on the age of the book, about 500 BC is when it's speculated to be written, and how it was the same time as Confucius and Lao Tzu that Sun Tzu was writing his stuff too. You have all the spiritual leaders, and you have this, warmonger, also both being successful at the same time with their writings and teachings.
Yeah, I found that a really cool point too. Our forward Pat had a bunch of cool notes, like how this was read by Napoleon and all sorts of different generals throughout the First and Second World War, and Joseph Stalin and Fidel Castro and Mao Zedong. There was some really cool facts that kind of set the stage for how impactful this book has been. And also mentioned his grandson wrote an additional 33 chapters on the practicalities of warfare, and his name was like Sun Pin or Sun Bin. So that
Yeah.
was interesting facts just even before getting into the book, which was relentless.
Yeah, and the actual definition of Sun Tzu wasn't actually his name. Tzu in Chinese just means master. So Lao Tzu is actually old master, and Sun Tzu is just, his name is supposedly just Sun Wu, and Tzu was just a title that was given to him afterwards. So I always kind of wondered why, like, what's the relation between Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu, but it's just a title that means master.
There's definitely a hierarchy in the names. You can definitely get that out of the names. And another interesting thing about how so many generals throughout history have read this book, Napoleon, Castro, and all these different leaders of the world. The reason why they've read Sun Tzu's Art of War is because it's a moral law of combat. It follows a very disciplined method of how to train your troops. It also is in accordance to whoever the ruler is. And he also presents it almost like treating the entire world and the four seasons in respectable and fluent matters, for lack of a better word here. He presents the moral law. He also presents just laying down the plans, just the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method of discipline. And again, depending on what your interpretation is, I found it to be kind of like following the 10 Commandments, essentially, in the Bible. The moral law is the cause of the people in accordance to the general who's leading the pack, going through any kind of danger. Heaven is just, like the day or the night, depending on the season. The earth is just this round open space, this open ground, and it's completely random of where one can end up, whether they become prosperous or they will die. The commander has to follow a sense of courage and a strict guideline to follow through with his troops towards the enemy. And of course, the method of discipline is obviously just marshaling the army and making sure that the maintenance of the path are well established. The control of your military is expedient, and overall, it could lead to potential victories.
Yeah, one experiment that I ran was just whenever it really mentioned warfare specifically, and just try to like substitute the word war with life or conversation or something. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But for those 5 points, I really felt like it was a really good way to just live, like you said, just within the 7 heavenly virtues kind of thing. Like when it gives you the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline, you can apply that to almost anything in life, not just the battlefield.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, there's another quote that he says. I also kind of compared it to Jordan Peterson's quote that he brings up in his book, 12 Rules for Life, which is life is suffering. Sun Tzu's quote here is, all warfare is based on deception. Hence, when you are in battle, what we see may not be so active, or we tend to figure out that the enemy is far away, but in reality, they could be just a few feet in front of us, hiding in the bushes somewhere. Or that we have enough bait to trap the enemy, but sometimes we can end up falling into our own bait from time to time. And in regards to life in general, it does kind of compare to how we are ultimately suffering whatever we have to go through, disease, financial hardships, relationships. And we have to learn how to not panic. We have to learn not to lose our footing in regards to terrible situations and learn to look at everything and figure out a way to establish order and find alternatives that would potentially guide us through these terrible situations.
Yeah, I think it is a pretty great metaphor for a lot of different aspects, like for business or for politics or for life or for health. I think that's probably one of the reasons this text has survived so long is the diversity of the application of these rules. And again, thank goodness it's not about manslaughter because that probably wouldn't have lasted just as long. I really like the one quote where he's attributing the success ratio based on the amount of calculations that the two forces make. The person who calculates more is more likely to have a victory than the person who calculates less or not at all. And that whole notion that warfare is about deception. If you're hungry, you need to look like you're not hungry. If you're tired, you need to look like you're not tired, and vice versa, so that the enemy is constantly underestimating you or worrisome or wearisome of what you're up to and taking the longer route around to your points so that they're unsure of what you're up to at all times. It was very interesting. I didn't see that as something that could be applied to maybe relationships, but certainly business and things like that. And that's just chapter 1. I mean, it's pretty cool.
So in chapter 2, let me pull up my notes here. He talks about learning how to wage war and to prepare for any potential outcome. Most of the time it's swift, and other times when you're facing hundreds of thousands of enemy soldiers, there is a lot of defense methods that you have to go through in this part, with provisions enough to carry all of your men towards victory. And just the small things too, like figuring out how to acquire certain items and keeping the men entertained and not overwhelmed. And when you engage in actual fighting, sometimes the equipment can be dull, it can be damped, and you end up exhausting your strength. But then again, the resources may not be as equal to the entire overall state. And so this kind of difficulty is, from what I've read, is very overwhelming too, because I mean, that's the proper word. It's just overwhelming. And so you have to learn how to take care of the resources that you have, as well as building a proper defense around your whole compound. So long as you don't make like a stupid haste or whatever, or just think in fear, as long as you don't do that, then you will have a lengthy but better chance of success.
I think one of the really cool parts about chapter 2 is the one quote, there is no instance of a country having benefited from long-term warfare. And to see that written down in this text that has been read by so many different campaigns over the years, it feels like perhaps that point gets missed a bit by the leaders when it comes to true warfare. Like, if more people read that line and let that sink in, I think that would be quite beneficial to this human race. That they realized that 2,600 years ago, or however long it was, and yet we still have these crazy 100-year wars and decades-long campaigns. There's no benefit.
And like the quote is, in war, then let your great object be victory, not lengthy campaigns. You don't have to take 100 years to get the point across. You just need to win.
Yeah, and know when to back down from an engagement and not set your entire nation up to suffer. And he talks about some of the maths involved, like the 1,000 pounds or 1,000 ounces of silver a day to keep 100,000 men on the war campaign and talks about stealing the enemy's provisions, saying 1 cartload of the enemy's provisions is worth 20 of your own. And it's interesting.
Yeah, he's very careful about how much to take from the enemy, depending on the size, depending on how big the enemy's territory is. He's very careful about that.
And like, without trying to, I don't know, describe the whole book, like, I think a lot of people should read this because the details that he's able to go to in each of these chapters are interesting, and you can pull a lot out of it. And probably returning to the book, you'll get new things each time. It's like the size of the Tao Te Ching, and that makes it very easy to consume. So I don't want to bore the audience talking about too many things. I took a lot of notes, and I'll probably take more notes and read it again soon. But overall, it was a really enjoyable, easily digested piece of philosophy. I think we can all relate to that.
And that one quote, there's no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. That is another quote that hits directly to the heart. And it also goes along with he who does not know the evils of war cannot appreciate its benefits. Sometimes that can be pointless. Sometimes that can be rather true. That can really stick to people for a long time. We think about World War I, World War II, Vietnam, the Korean War, Iraq War. We think we carry this mentality of we're tough and we're going to give the country that we're fighting against our bootstrap and be proud of it. But in actuality, the mental state of that is very tough. Sometimes a soldier cannot go through that. The damage that it can carry in the psyche, as well as the denizens who go through that, are not well equipped to go through the prolonged effects of war.
I mean, I don't want to have too much of an opinion on soldiers in combat at this stage, but I mean, yeah, PTSD is real. I'm proud of my military. I'm proud of the training programs that we have. I think we do a great job of taking care of our soldiers and ensuring the best that we can do. That's being here in Canada. Again, I don't want to have too much of an opinion about that right now because that's not something that I've fully fleshed out. But I certainly go to Remembrance Day, and I'm proud of my country and my country's army, and that's all I'll say about that specific detail.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between when a Canadian talks about their military and when an American talks about their military. Like we're kind of known as the peacekeepers, and I don't know, America's the world police, to put it politely.
Yeah, sometimes we can be like that. Other times we can just, show off and show how tough we are. Sometimes we can be a bully. Yeah, that stuff can be true. And I'm not a soldier. Of course, I've only read documents and I've read accounts of actual soldiers who have gone through war, not just, in movies and novels, but just reading about other people who have gone through that experience. I cannot imagine the turmoil that they had to go through for that, as well as trying to set up their own citizenry when they come back to the States and having a hard time fitting back into civil life, which brings into chapter 3, which is how to attack the enemy. And Sun Tzu mentions that the best way to take control of an enemy's territory is to not destroy, but to keep it intact and to find a place in a territory that's easy to take so that the enemy will become overwhelmed in if not knowing what to do.
Yeah, this was a really good chapter. I really liked that. Again, this isn't the art of warfare, slaughter, and destruction and how to destroy the world. It's like if you're invading a country, keep the resources intact. Like these are beneficial things. Just because it's your enemy's territory doesn't mean you should burn it to the ground and eliminate all of the resources, conserve all of these things. And again, that was like, oh, Yeah, I agree with this philosophy on war. That's really cool. And another big quote that came out of this chapter is, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And I think that's one of the really big quotes that comes out of The Art of War, and different forms of it and versions of it in shorter chunks. But knowing yourself and knowing the enemy is something to be said in all of these metaphors that you guys are talking about.
Yeah, especially the equivalent of detaching the number of soldiers, like going from somewhere between 100 and 500 to a company that contains 5 to 100 men. It's all in the numbers. And of course, it's not about destroying the enemy's territory, but more specifically, Sun Tzu mentions uh, that you have to learn how to break down the enemy's resistance. That mindset of just willing to accept your loss and your humility, not just to squirm and fight back with your screaming and kicking and everything. That's the kind of humility that he talks about, and it's that piece of harmony that he brings.
This is the chapter where he brings up his essentials for victory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I really like that bit. Any piece of this can be used as a metaphor for everyday life, just like splitting up your company could mean the same thing as just splitting up your day. Like
or
in,
to
yeah.
or to properly break up a relationship with somebody. I mean, I know that's kind of hard
Yeah.
to do with a friend or a girlfriend, boyfriend, or a spouse or a business partner. It's really hard, but the worst case scenario is to just throw a fit and just walk away without even putting a single word into negotiating or just explaining your troubles and not figuring out a solution of how to fix it.
Yeah. Going on to the essentials of victory, he says that he will win who knows when or when not to fight, which is pretty straightforward. You know your enemy, know yourself. Pretty much going back to the same thing. Who knows how to handle superior and inferior forces? I like that one quite a bit because it's saying that you're not completely boned if they have a stronger army than you. You just have to learn how to deal with having the smaller army, whether that's waiting for reinforcements or whatever that may be.
Yeah, and just the capacity of that within the ranks and keeping the spirit alive in general in all your soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
not making them feel like they are afraid to keep going or to just retreat.
And this is the part where we get to like the guerrilla warfare that was built off of this book, and the ability to take a very small group of people and take down an entire force just through knowing the enemy and knowing yourself. Like you said, Scott, this applies to so many situations, but when you look again at actual warfare, this has birthed a lot of brilliant things and strategies. And of strategies, he says there's an infinite amount. And I think that this is really high level thinking versus, I guess, the brute force description that I was expecting. And just pleasantly surprised all the way through reading this book.
Yeah, and there's a lot of notions that I see that align with a lot of the old Greek stuff that we've been reading too. Like sometimes I'm reading through this and I'll think, damn, has Sun Tzu read some Plato?
That's
Yeah,
what I thought.
honestly.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. Just building the opportunity to be able to show what we are capable of when the opportunity is given to us. That struck out. That's another thing that struck out to me.
And another one of his essentials for victory is having your whole army animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. So basically just having everyone on the same page. You know, if you're an employer or a war commander, still both applicable.
Yeah, you always think about the mission. You always think about the business plan. You always think about the next 3 months or 6 months on a project. Making sure that the budget is well placed. You make sure that everybody has gotten the resources. You've talked to the clients, making sure that, here's what's going on right now, and provide them feedback, and also allow them to give you feedback on what's going on. If something does occur, then you have to inform the entire team. It can't just be one department. It has to be everybody. And if one thing is stuck, if one thing is not moving, then you have to figure out as a team, as a department, how to resolve it. If the consequences arise, you have to figure out a way to tell the client truthfully that this is not going to work out. And of course, he brings up the idea of making no mistakes, which is very hard to do. Hence, the skillful fighter puts himself into an impossible situation, but he never misses an opportunity. Well, not opportunity, but moment. He never misses a moment to defeat the enemy. It has to be on his list every day. It's not the
Yeah.
other way around. You can't just sneak past him unless that's absolutely necessary. But the goal is just to defeat the enemy.
And that means ignoring the orders of the sovereign state, too. None of that matters as much as victory.
Yeah, I
Definitely.
like that quote that the good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat and then waited for an opportunity of defeating the enemy, which didn't necessarily come. But the first step was to put yourself in a situation where you can't be defeated and then wait patiently for the enemy to undo themselves. And
Yeah.
that's a great one for negotiation and business. I can see that one being used a lot.
I have one quote. I'm not sure if it's from this chapter or the next one, but the focus should be on making defeat impossible and waiting for the enemy to make a mistake.
Yeah, just let your enemies play out however they want to play out, and don't interrupt them when they do so.
Yeah, just utilize patience, defense, and discipline.
He brings up in a few chapters a few different metaphors about all sorts of different things, like the senses and the pentatonic melodies and the elements. And there's 5 of everything, which I found interesting that he seemed to like the number 5 of elements. He said there's water, fire, wood, metal, and earth. And immediately that rubbed me the wrong way because I was wondering where the element of air was, having been a huge Avatar: The Last Airbender fan. I was pretty
True.
old.
That's heaven.
Over.
That's heaven. Like
Yeah.
there's a specific character that the Chinese use for the word heaven, and it's kind of a poor translation, but it means like the spiritual world, the weather, like the air, the sky. It's all kind of falls into heaven. So an airbender would use the element of heaven.
Well, that kind of makes sense, and that's kind of how I justified it in my mind, but I was still upset about it.
I think it's best not to look at air as air. Just look at it as a different kind of interpretation of air. Like
we
heaven,
should have
or
hundreds of elements because we have the periodic table. We've evolved since then.
Yes, but like I said before, I mean, reading this book has many interpretations of it. I mean, you could look at air as just air. You could just look at it at the heavens. You can look at it as the spirit of the earth. Whatever you might like to look at, it's just going to be a part of how Sun Tzu sees it.
Yeah, I think it's just our Western minds hitting a roadblock.
Well, let's talk about a new quote. I like this one. We shall be unable to turn natural advantage to account unless we make use of local guides.
I had that one written down too.
I think that one's a really good one and easily applies to every single context, everywhere, at all times.
And of course, without local guidance, we are wrapped up in our own arrogance too.
Of course.
We only see one thing without looking all around us, not looking down multiple paths, not picking up multiple choices, not meeting multiple people.
Yeah, and when you
It,
find yourself confronted with the dragon of chaos, if you don't reach out, you're gonna have a lot harder time with that dragon. All those locals can help you out a little bit. Doesn't matter what it is, if you don't understand something, there's always gonna be someone else to help you understand it.
it is
Definitely.
silly to go it alone, especially when you can YouTube so many different things. Like there is a local guide describing how to deal with what you're dealing with.
It's dangerous to go alone. Take this.
Absolutely.
Another good piece of advice from Sun Tzu was the when you surround an army, leave an outlet free. Do not press a desperate foe too hard.
Yeah, because again, you're offering them humility. You're not just going in there, guns blazing, or in this case, swords swinging around. You're giving them a chance to live, or to live out their final moments with a bit of peace.
Yeah, and that also gets revisited towards the end of the book by saying that an army that knows they're all about to die is going to fight with 150% of their willpower because they got nothing left to live for. But if there's an outlet left free where they can survive, they're always going to be conflicted. Oh, do I fight these guys to the bitter end or do I hightail it out of here? Not only are you being civil in allowing them to escape and letting them pick life over death, you're also creating that conflict in their mind of saying, should I live or should I die? And then they'll never be fighting at 100%.
Yeah, and it's a really good metaphor for conversation, debate, argument, social interaction.
Like Jocko Willink always says, you got to flank the enemy.
Yeah, exactly. You want to give people the opportunity to save face and be respected still. You can't just put someone in a corner and let them die in it.
I had one more quote that I really wanted to share because it reminded me of Bruce Lee.
Well, let's all do one more really good quote and end it there.
All right, that sounds like a plan. My quote was, just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare, there are no constant conditions. And like as soon as I read that, I just heard Bruce Lee in the back of my head saying, "Be water, my friend."
Yeah, I thought the same thing. It's great how like I really had the wrong idea about the art of war in my head, and the book is just really great, and he leaves you with this sort of understanding that warfare isn't about slaughter and injustice and about wanting to be in war or that war is something to be chased after. It's just simply if you're in a situation of war, here is some basic guidelines on how to get out of war as quick as possible.
And
Yeah.
it's part of it's almost treated like a law. You have to treat it like a law. You have to treat it like a commandment. Without it, you are entirely different. You are an entirely different person who sees just one thing and becomes somebody that you're not entirely yourself.
Like the reason I had the expectation that I think I had is because of the way I've been exposed to war. And if you just, it's like taking an AI, right? And you feed it 1,000 hours of all of the history and movies and documentaries about war. Would they produce this book or would they produce a book that was written by a tyrant who wanted to dominate the world? And that's what I think I was expecting the book to look like based on all of the exposure I've had to war-like topics in my short time on this planet. So I think I was picturing a rule book that would have created the wars that I've seen instead of the rule book that ought to have been used and would have prevented the wars that I've seen.
Definitely. And the quote that I picked to wrap this up is, do not repeat the tactics which you have gained after one victory, but let the methods be regulated by the infinite variety of circumstances. So essentially, once you learn a skill, once you learn a recipe, once you learn how to build something, following that method can be redundant. It can be, yeah, it could just be redundant and there's no life to it after you've earned it. And if it's a skill that can be taken completely out of control, you have to learn to keep it in motion. You have to keep it in check. Kind of like how you keep your emotions in check when you go to a stranger's house, when you meet them for the first time, or you have this idea of who this person is right before you meet him, or possibly never meet him until you do, or just having your high expectations of something go completely down the drain and you lose all hope for that. So the idea of learning a tactic should be not just familiar, but also it can be expanded upon. Can it be used in multiple ways for the right purposes and not just for wrongdoing, or not just for snitching, or not just for trying to control somebody to bend their knees for your own agenda?
Yeah. Just the notion that just because something works doesn't mean it can't be improved or made to work better.
And you don't want to become a predictable type, right? Like if you're not
Mm.
changing it up and growing and evolving, then you're going to be stuck in this pattern, and it can be the best pattern out there, but that doesn't take into account human evolution. And there's always a tweak that you can make to be a bit more efficient. And if you get stuck repeating the same techniques, expecting a different result, well, you fall into the definition of insanity.
Yeah.
I guess that leaves it with me to do the final quote share. And I, being a hypnosis junkie, I've watched a lot of woo-woo-y stuff like the law of attraction and things like that, and I've gotten into reading tarot. And so this quote jumped out at me and slapped me in the face, and it's prohibit the taking of omens and do away with superstitious doubt. Then until death itself comes, no calamity need be feared. And at first, I really didn't like it because
I
I
really
think
like that one.
I took it personally, and then I thought about it some more, and I thought, no, this is actually a really powerful thing, because I don't agree with superstitious doubt, and the taking of omens is a little ridiculous. And the more you think about it, the more you think, okay, well, if this was ingrained in the hearts of the commanders of these Asian armies, no wonder they made explosives so quickly and stopped looking at birds to determine whether to fight or whether to move like the Greeks did. And it was really cool, because if you have doubt in your mind, you're not going to pursue it 100%. But the point is to clear all the doubt away and go after it without thinking you're going to fail, because that, like, even if you do fail, that doesn't help you. But when you have that doubt in your mind and you're waiting for some external force to tell you the time is right, you're going to hold yourself back. That quote is really cool.
And I guess that quote also works with the fear of falling into a meaningless existence. If there's nothing to be obtained in life, then what's the point? But as long as you create something to look forward to, even if it sounds artificial, even if it's something that you would never imagine happening, at least it'll give you a boost. It'll give you something to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, you said you really liked the quote. What did you think about it?
Just don't be superstitious. Base your decisions in reality and not just, feelings in your gut.
Oh, that's an interesting interpretation. You don't like superstitious hope either, because it says do away with superstitious doubt, but you seem to be against all superstitious
Yeah, pretty
entities.
much.
Why is that?
I don't know. Just feels like you're lying to yourself, which I guess Sun Tzu really isn't against, since he talks about manipulating his own military.
Yeah, it's
But
like if everything that you structure is making your army believe you're going to succeed, because there's no point in telling them to fail. Like he is effectively lying to them to manipulate their emotional disposition to believe that for some sort of superstitious omnipotent power that his commander has, they're going to win. And he's removing all the superstitious doubt by creating this force of yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to succeed, because he knows there's no point in believing you're going to fail, but there is a benefit to believing you're going to do well.
Yeah, I get that. I don't know. It doesn't sit well with me, or it bugs me a little bit.
Well, if not superstition, then what else? What else works for you personally? I mean, besides just listening to facts of reality and everything, is there something else that might work?
I don't think so.
Because if you don't have doubt or positivity, superstition's the right word for it. Like, where do you get motivation and perseverance from? How do you choose to put those hats on?
Not from omens that I find in nature, I can tell you that much.
Well, I don't need to know how you don't, because I could come up with a big list of how you don't. You don't do it by looking at cars. You don't do it by climbing trees. Like, that doesn't matter. I'm looking for a tool for my toolkit, good sir.
Just thinking about how it's going to benefit me, I guess, and people around me. Just working towards the greater good and putting a lot of thought into it.
You know, you remind me of how Elon Musk works, because he has that great quote from the Joe Rogan podcast. He says, "I'd rather be optimistic and wrong than pessimistic and right."
Absolutely.
He likes to envision a better future for humanity. He wants to be able to have the possibility to colonize on Mars and go out there on the stars. And as long as he carries that mentality, that keeps him moving forward. That keeps his business running. He keeps running Tesla. He keeps running Hyperlink, and the Boring Company, and trying to figure out how to build rockets to orbit around Earth to provide internet access to everyone around the world. Just being open to that is enough to give you a boost to move forward.
Yeah. That was well put right there.
And you don't have to fully believe it.
Yeah.
Just again, you can just let it give you a small amount of boost or just a head start.
So for me, like, yeah, knowing the benefits is one thing. Maybe in the beginning that'll make me pursue a goal, but I find that the existential quagmire of crisis and indecision still strikes me from time to time. And in those moments, it doesn't matter if I know that it's doable. There's just that emotional pull that drags you down every now and then, and it's still something I'm trying to overcome. And I think, after having 3 days where you're just not batting your normal average, and you wake up and the sun hits your face in the morning, and you just get this feeling like, oh, today's going to be a good day. Like, that's superstitious, and that's enough to get me out of a slump. Seeing a single flower growing in a sidewalk crack, that's random and bizarre and inspiring.
I guess if that works for you.
Well, I don't know. I'm still establishing my systems, and I'm open and curious and investigating how to operate at 100% efficiency. I'll let you know what works once I have $1 million and a private jet. But for right now, I can't say that my systems have succeeded, because I don't have those things. I don't even know if those are the things I want. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty optimistic, but I don't think, well, maybe it does. I don't think superstition has anything to do with my optimism, though. Like, I just wake up every morning and say, life is good. I'm still breathing. I think it all really just comes down to mindset. But like Jocko says, you can't depend on motivation. You have to depend on discipline, which comes from within.
Oh, absolutely.
True. And Will, I get what you're saying with the whole existential moment thing and trying to figure out if it's worthwhile. But again, if you stay in that mindset for very long, you probably won't get very far. The only thing that you can get far is just to start now ask yourself, what if this happened? And try it out.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's just, you do all these different things and then you look back and you say, have I made progress? Have I been consistent? Am I achieving my goals? Am I happy with where I'm at? And has my system and philosophy of life resulted in where I'm at? And is it good enough? And I'm constantly, well, not constantly, but quite frequently assessing where I'm at, where I'm going, how I'm getting there, and determining if the tools that I'm using to get me from A to B are enough at this stage in my life. Because when you get from A to B, well, now you need to get to C. And the tools that got you to B might not necessarily get you to C. And I'd like to get to that star and that ever moving point of aim.
And it definitely shows how hard you work at it. So yeah, definitely.
Actually, I'm gonna cheat on us, guys. I want to make one more share from my notes for chapter 13. My note that I took is one word: spies. That's the only note I took on that chapter, and that's all I have to share about it.
Well,
Spies.
how do you think that last chapter would be applicable to everyday life then? How would you utilize spies just to better yourself?
Oh, if I was a sociopath, I could think of a few options.
He definitely brings up the idea and the benefits of spies. Definitely. Trying to look through my notes here.
Yeah, he lists off the 5 kinds of them: the local,
Yeah, no,
inward, converted, doomed, and surviving spies.
Yeah, his notes on spies were kind of the flagstone to his foundation of making decisions and making calculations. Is the only true source of knowledge, because superstitions don't give you that, is from the enemy. And the only way to get knowledge of the enemy is through spies. And the only good spies are those spies that you've found in your own ranks that are from the enemy that you've converted to get the best information and then send them back to get more. And that's how you make your calculations. And that's how you win a war. And that's crazy. And that's not going to help me in relationships because I'm not going to send spies to spy on my friends. That would be weird. I also don't think that's a good business practice. If I was Apple, I would not want to be infiltrating Microsoft. I think that's just underhanded. That's what they do, I'm sure. And that's why we have multiple companies producing the same product with very little difference, but the same price for both product. And we have these duopolies that are crippling our economy.
Well, I mean, that's the reason why we have competition in businesses. We like to know what our competitors are up to, how they're using their products, how they build them, how they manage to service them. And that can give you an idea of a blueprint that you can work on with your team.
Well, see, for me, it's like, do you want to be Steve Jobs or Elon Musk? And not Steve Jobs, obviously, rest in peace. But like, do you want to be the CEO of Apple or the CEO of like Tesla? Like, who on earth is Elon Musk looking at and sending spies in to get their information? Like, this guy's an innovator and he's creating
Martians.
technology that's gonna, yeah, exactly. Like, be better than every single system that we currently have. Why would you want to compete with a company to make the same product? Why wouldn't you want to innovate and completely change the landscape of the world?
Because without it, you won't have many options to pick as a consumer.
How many options do we need of the same thing?
2 or 3,
Normally,
I'd say.
yeah, around that, or maybe
I'd make-
4 or
I'd
5.
make the argument that like items are kind of not getting us to a better place as a species.
You have to have variety. Always have variety.
No, you need to have water and bread. That's to variety.
Yeah,
Give water and bread to everyone.
You want variety. You need water.
Variety gives you options, and options give you breathing room, and breathing room gives you control. And when you have
Production.
control, you have the choice to pick whichever product you want to use.
Yeah, I would argue that the production of variety destroys the atmosphere, which removes all breathing room for all people.
I don't think we have any breathing room because it's socially unacceptable to not have a phone.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, let's not talk about how the society we live in is a dystopian. existential
Yeah.
crisis. Let's just end
Next
on that.
week, Animal Farm.
Yes.
Perfect segue.
All right, I'm good for that.
Yep.
All right, yeah. That concludes our video on the art of war. So until next time, like, comment, subscribe. May the force be with you.